11:30 on a Friday night. Rain hammered against the gleaming facade of Riverside Plaza, transforming the upscale shopping center into a monument of glass and water. Most stores had closed hours ago, their displays of designer goods now performing for an audience of storm clouds and empty parking lots. Catherine Morgan sat alone on the cold stone steps at the east entrance. Her charcoal suit clung to her frame, soaked through. Mascara traced dark rivers down her cheeks. The blonde hair that normally framed her face in a perfect corporate sweep now hung in wet strands against her skin. Her Lexus keys lay scattered on the concrete beside her, just out of reach, as if they too had abandoned her in this moment of weakness. From inside the darkened mall, Michael Brennan watched through the glass doors. At 45, the night security guard's face carried the map of a man who had seen more than his share of disappointments. His dark eyes, still sharp despite the late hour, assessed the situation with the detachment of someone trained to evaluate risk and respond accordingly. The woman outside was Catherine Morgan, CEO of TechCore Industries, the woman whose name appeared on his paychecks, though she had never once looked him in the eye during her brisk walks through the security checkpoint. The woman now rendered helpless by whatever demons had driven her to this state. Michael's radio crackled. "East entrance all clear." His thumb hovered over the talk button. Something about the vulnerability of the moment made him pause. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the empty mall, his reflection stared back at him. A man in a uniform 2 sizes too large. A ghost walking the corridors of other people's success, checking their locks, guarding their wealth, invisible except when needed. East entrance clear. The lie came easily. He switched off the radio, silencing the dispatcher's acknowledgement. His supervisor would check the logs later, might even ask why the radio went silent for 15 minutes. Michael would deal with that then. Right now, a woman sat alone in the rain, and his job description didn't cover what he was about to do. The automatic doors hissed open. Rain immediately soaked through his uniform as Michael stepped into the downpour, but he barely noticed. Years of standing watch in all weather had made him immune to such discomforts. "Ms. Morgan," his voice carried over the rainfall, gentle but firm. Catherine looked up, her bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. Recognition failed to register on her face. To her he was just a uniform, not a person. The thought should have stung, but Michael was accustomed to invisibility. "I can give you a ride home." Catherine gestured vaguely toward the executive parking area, her movements uncoordinated. "My car. I need to get home." "You're in no condition to drive." Michael kept his voice level, professional. "I finish my shift in 15 minutes. Let me take you home." Pride battled necessity in Catherine's eyes. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement that seemed to cost her considerable effort. Michael extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Catherine took it. Her fingers were ice-cold against his calloused palm. As he helped her to her feet, Catherine's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen illuminated briefly in the darkness. Unknown caller. But beneath it a notification that made Michael's trained eye pause. Security breach, level 1. "Your phone!" Michael reached for it, but Catherine snatched it away with surprising agility for someone so intoxicated. "No, it's nothing. Work never stops." The phone went dark in her hand. Michael filed the observation away for later consideration. Level 1 security breach at a tech company wasn't nothing. But that wasn't his concern tonight. Getting this woman home safely was. 20 minutes later, Michael's ancient Honda Civic crawled through the rain-slicked streets of Hillcrest, the city's affluent neighborhood where old money built new monuments to success. The contrast between his car and the surroundings couldn't have been more stark. Work boot in a display case of Italian leather. Catherine sat in the passenger seat, head resting against the window, eyes closed but not sleeping. The steady rhythm of the windshield wipers seemed to pull her toward some semblance of calm. Michael's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out just enough to see the screen. Daniel Foster, former colleague. The third call tonight. Michael silenced it quickly, but not before Catherine's eyes fluttered open. "Important call." Her words carried more clarity than before, the fresh air and movement restoring some faculty of thought. "No, Just an old friend who doesn't understand time zones. Another lie. Daniel lived in the same city, knew exactly what time it was. But whatever Daniel wanted could wait. Had to wait. Michael had made his choice 2 years ago when he walked away from that world, and Daniel calling 3 times in one night wouldn't change that decision. Catherine seemed to accept his explanation, turning back toward the window. Left at the next light. The building with the copper awning. The phone buzzed again in Michael's pocket. This time he ignored it completely, but his jaw tightened involuntarily. Whatever Daniel wanted, it couldn't be good. Not at this hour, not after everything that had happened at CyberShield, not after the way things had ended. As they pulled up to Catherine's building, a gleaming high-rise of glass and steel that probably cost more per square foot than Michael's entire apartment. She fumbled with her purse. "I should pay you. For the ride." Offense flickered through Michael's carefully controlled expression. "That's not necessary. I'm not a taxi service." Catherine looked at him properly for the first time since he'd found her on those steps. Her blue eyes, clearing now, focused on his face with an intensity that suggested she was seeing him rather than just his uniform. "You work for Tech Corps. Security, right?" Surprise touched Michael's features. "Night security at the plaza. 18 months now." Something passed across Catherine's face. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe embarrassment at not having known one of her own employees. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into his hand. "Thank you. I appreciate your discretion." The words came out stiffly, as if gratitude was an unpracticed muscle. As she stepped out of the car, Catherine swayed slightly. Michael moved quickly around the vehicle to steady her, one hand gently gripping her elbow. For a moment they stood in the rain together, CEO and security guard, both equally drenched, both equally human. The veneer of corporate hierarchy dissolved in the downpour, leaving only 2 people caught in a moment neither had planned. "I can make it from here." Catherine pulled away slightly, some fragment of pride reasserting itself. Michael hesitated, weighing concern against respect for her autonomy. "Are you sure?" Catherine nodded, then reached into her purse again and handed him the business card he'd pocketed without looking. "If you ever need anything." The standard executive line that usually meant nothing. Michael pocketed the card for the second time. "Good night, Ms. Morgan." As Catherine disappeared through the glass doors of her building, Michael's phone buzzed a 4th time. With a sigh that carried the weight of choices he'd rather not revisit, he answered. "Daniel, it's midnight. What do you want?" The voice on the other end was urgent, stripped of pleasantries. "Michael, they found it. The vulnerability I warned them about. It's worse than we thought." Michael's blood ran cold despite the warm rain. "That's not my problem anymore." Even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. They would never be true. Some problems didn't respect career changes or new beginnings. They're going to exploit it, and when they do, Tech Corps won't be the only one that suffers. Michael glanced up at Catherine's building, where a light had just come on in a top-floor apartment. The woman who signed his paychecks. The woman whose company apparently sat on top of a vulnerability significant enough to make Daniel Foster break 2 years of silence. "I can't get involved. I have Ethan to think about." "That's exactly why you should care. This is bigger than corporate espionage now. This is about—" Michael ended the call, his hand trembling slightly. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof of his car like impatient fingers demanding attention he wouldn't give. He sat there for a long moment, caught between the past he'd left behind and the present he'd carefully constructed from necessity and love. Neither of them could have predicted how that rainy night would unravel everything they thought they knew about each other, or how the words "security breach" would change both their lives forever. The next Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. Michael Brennan stood in his tiny kitchen at 5:30 a.m., brewing coffee in a mug decorated with faded Star Wars characters, a relic from happier times. His apartment was small but meticulously organized. Every surface bore the mark of a man who found comfort in order, who needed control over at least this one small corner of existence. His son Ethan sat at their second-hand table already awake and hunched over what looked like a complex diagram drawn on the back of yesterday's newspaper. At 10 years old, Ethan had inherited his father's analytical mind and his mother's artistic eye, a combination that produced the intricate schematics now sprawling across the kitchen table. "Dad, why don't they make medicine that doesn't taste so bad?" Ethan's question came without looking up from his drawing, his pencil tracing lines with the precision of someone 3 times his age. "I could design a delivery system that targets taste buds differently." Michael smiled as he watched his son work, a familiar ache spreading through his chest. Ethan's intelligence was both blessing and constant reminder of everything Michael had sacrificed: the career, the recognition, the future that had evaporated when he chose his son's welfare over professional vindication. Sometimes the most effective solutions aren't the most pleasant, but that doesn't mean we stop looking for better ways. Michael set a glass of water and 2 pills beside Ethan's cereal bowl. The autoimmune condition that had appeared 2 years ago required strict management. Management that cost more than Michael's previous health insurance had been willing to cover. Night security at TechCore's Riverside Plaza wasn't glamorous, but it provided the comprehensive benefits Ethan needed. Sometimes love looked like checking IDs at a shopping mall. Ethan wrinkled his nose but dutifully swallowed the medication. The daily ritual never got easier for either of them. $800 a month for pills that barely kept the symptoms at bay. Michael's phone buzzed with a text message from Ethan's doctor. Another appointment had been scheduled. Another specialist consultation. Another bill that would stretch their budget past breaking. As he drove Ethan to school in their aging Honda, Michael couldn't shake the memory of Catherine Morgan sitting helpless in the rain or Daniel's urgent call. The words "security breach" kept replaying in his mind, intertwined with memories of code and algorithms he'd spent 2 years trying to forget. At TechCore's gleaming headquarters, the morning carried the usual buzz of corporate Monday. Catherine Morgan arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, her composure fully restored. Designer heels clicked against marble floors as she crossed the lobby, employees nodding respectfully as she passed. If anyone had seen her state 3 nights ago, there was no indication in her perfectly assembled exterior. Grant Sutherland intercepted her near the elevators. At 48, TechCore's chief operating officer represented the company's old guard executives who had built the organization before Catherine's arrival 5 years ago and watched her rapid rise with barely concealed resentment. "Catherine, we need to discuss the security concerns that came up over the weekend." Grant's voice carried the weight of someone who believed problems should be solved through proper channels, documented procedures, established hierarchies. He clutched a leather portfolio embossed with the company logo. "The vulnerability in Neuralink is more extensive than our team initially assessed. The board is concerned about potential liabilities if this goes public before the product launch next month." Catherine nodded absently, but her mind was elsewhere. The fragments of memory from Friday night were starting to coalesce. The security guard who had driven her home, the notification on her phone, the pounding headache that had greeted her Saturday morning, along with urgent messages from the cybersecurity team. "Have we identified the source of the vulnerability?" She stepped into the elevator and Grant followed, pressing the button for the executive floor. "Not yet. Johnson thinks it might be a fundamental flaw in the neural interface protocol. If that's the case, we're looking at months of delays, not weeks." The elevator doors closed, sealing them in sleek, silent isolation as they ascended. Catherine's reflection in the polished metal showed none of the turmoil churning beneath her surface. Neuralink was supposed to be TechCore's breakthrough in neural interface that would revolutionize how humans interacted with technology. The product launch was scheduled to coincide with the company's IPO. A security flaw now could sink everything she'd worked for. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the cybersecurity team for this afternoon, and get me everything we have on this vulnerability." As Grant departed toward his office, Catherine's assistant met her with coffee and a tablet displaying the day's schedule. "Ms. Morgan, you have the investor call at 9, strategy meeting at 11, and lunch with the board at 1. Cancel lunch with the board. Tell them I'm working directly on the Neuralink situation." Alone in her office, a minimalist space of glass and steel that offered a panoramic view of the city, Catherine finally allowed her professional mask to slip. She sank into her chair, the weight of potential disaster settling on her shoulders like a physical presence. Neuralink wasn't just another product, it represented TechCore's future and her own. As the company's first female CEO, Catherine had faced skepticism at every turn. Success with Neuralink would silence her critics permanently. Its failure would confirm every doubt, every whispered suggestion that she had been promoted beyond her capabilities. Catherine opened her secure email, scanning through the technical reports from the weekend. The terminology was dense, filled with jargon that stretched the limits of her technical understanding. But one thing became clear as she read the vulnerability was severe, potentially allowing unauthorized access to users' neural data. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost dismissed it as spam until she saw the subject line, "Check your personal email." P. Catherine frowned, then opened her personal account on her tablet. A new message waited in her inbox, sent from an anonymous address. The vulnerability in Neuralink was identified 18 months ago by a former employee of CyberShield Corporation. TechCore's current security team doesn't have the expertise to fix it before launch. Find Michael Brennan. He knows. The name hit Catherine like a physical blow. Michael Brennan, the security guard from Friday night, the man who had witnessed her at her lowest, most vulnerable moment. With trembling fingers, Catherine pulled up the employee directory, searching for his name. Michael Brennan. Night security, Riverside Plaza location. Employed for 18 months. Prior employment history incomplete. There was something about him that had seemed out of place. The way he had organized her scattered belongings in the car, the careful precision of his movements, the intelligence in his eyes that seemed at odds with his uniform and his position. Catherine picked up her phone and dialed the head of Human Resources. "I need the complete employment file for Michael Brennan, night security at Riverside Plaza. I want everything. Background check, previous employment, education, everything." An hour later, Catherine stared at the file on her desk, pieces falling into place with disturbing clarity. Michael Brennan, master's degree in computer science from M1T, former lead security architect at CyberShield Corporation, TechCore's main competitor. Resigned abruptly 2 years ago during corporate restructuring. No official employment until joining TechCore as a security guard 18 months ago. The disconnect between his qualifications and current position was jarring. Why would a top-tier security architect take a job as a night guard? And why at TechCore of all places? Catherine's intercom buzzed. "Ms. Morgan, the cybersecurity team is assembled in conference room A. Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. She was still staring at Michael's file when she responded. The photo showed a man in his mid-40s, dark hair, strong features, eyes that held intelligence and something else. Wariness, perhaps. Or pain. The cybersecurity meeting confirmed her worst fears. The vulnerability in Neuralink's protocol could potentially allow a sophisticated attacker to extract sensitive neural data from users, essentially reading their thoughts. The team's proposed solutions would require months of redevelopment, effectively killing their launch timeline. There has to be another way. Something we're missing. Catherine paced the length of the conference room, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. Johnson, the head of cybersecurity, spread his hands in a gesture of defeat. "This isn't a simple patch job, Ms. Morgan. The vulnerability is embedded in the fundamental architecture of the neural interface. We'd need someone who understands both the hardware and the encryption protocols at a level none of us possess." Catherine stopped pacing. What about bringing in an outside consultant? Someone with specialized experience in neural interface security? Grant Sutherland, who had been sitting silently through most of the meeting, spoke up. "With all due respect, finding someone with that specific expertise who isn't already working for our competitors would be nearly impossible. And bringing in an outsider this close to launch creates its own security risks." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "I may have someone in mind." Later that evening, Michael walked through the empty corridors of Riverside Plaza, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The night shift had become a familiar routine, checking doors, monitoring security feeds, performing hourly walks through the deserted mall. It was mindless work that left his thoughts free to wander often to places he'd rather not go. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Another text from Ethan's science teacher, Miss Rachel Brooks. Ethan had attempted to redesign the classroom's ventilation system, claiming it would improve air quality and student concentration. The teacher's message was polite but firm. Ethan needed to focus on being a fifth grader, not an environmental engineer. Michael sighed, typing a quick apology. Ethan's brilliance was becoming harder to contain within the confines of a standard classroom. Another problem without an easy solution. As he rounded the corner toward the food court, Michael noticed a figure sitting alone at one of the tables. His hand instinctively moved toward the radio on his belt before recognition dawned. Catherine Morgan sat primly on a plastic chair, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Michael's monthly rent. Her posture was rigid, hands clasped on the table before her like a student awaiting examination. "Ms. Morgan, the mall is closed to the public." Michael approached cautiously, professional distance warring with the memory of helping her to her door 3 nights ago. "I'm aware. I came to speak with you, Mr. Brennan." Catherine's voice carried none of the vulnerability from Friday night. This was the CEO, not the woman who had sat broken in the rain. Or should I say, lead security architect Brennan. The title hit Michael like a physical blow, memories flooding back of a life he'd deliberately left behind. His expression remained neutral, but his pulse quickened. "I'm just a security guard now." A security guard with a master's from MIT and 8 years' experience designing encryption protocols for neural interfaces. Catherine's words were precise, each one a revelation of research conducted, connections made. "A security guard who previously worked for our main competitor until your abrupt resignation 2 years ago." Michael's jaw tightened. "If you've come to fire me for failing to disclose my full employment history, I'd appreciate if you'd just get it over with. My shift ends at 7 and Ethan needs breakfast before school." "Ethan, your son, 10 years old. Diagnosed with juvenile autoimmune disorder 2 years ago." Catherine noted Michael's eyes narrowing and added quickly, "Yes, I did my research, just as I'm sure you've done yours on TechCore's current situation." Michael remained silent, his face unreadable. Catherine leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to fire you, Mr. Brennan. I'm here to offer you your real job back. I already have a job, one that provides health insurance for my son." Michael's voice was cold, controlled. Everything about his posture screamed defensive. "A job far beneath your capabilities. And I suspect you know exactly why I'm here. The vulnerability in Neuralink's neural interface protocol, the same vulnerability you identified at CyberShield before your resignation." Michael's expression flickered surprise, quickly masked. "What makes you think I know anything about that?" "Because you tried to warn CyberShield about it 2 years ago, and instead of listening, they forced you out." Catherine played her ace, watching his reaction carefully. "Because the anonymous email I received this morning came from someone who knows both you and the technical details of our situation. And because you've been working at TechCore for exactly as long as we've been developing Neuralink." She placed her tablet on the table between them, displaying technical specifications. "Our cybersecurity team estimates it would take months to redesign the protocol. We don't have months. The vulnerability puts our users at risk of having their neural data compromised. I need someone who understands the problem intimately." Michael stared at the specifications, muscle memory from his previous life, already identifying potential solutions. He fought the urge to reach for the tablet to dive into the code he could see displayed there. Why would I help TechCore? When I found this vulnerability at CyberShield, I was called paranoid, accused of exaggerating threats to justify a bigger security budget. When I persisted, they suggested I was disloyal, possibly working for competitors. His laugh was hollow, bitter with remembered injustice. Ironic, considering where I ended up. "I'm not asking you to be loyal to TechCore. I'm asking you to prevent a security catastrophe that could affect thousands of users, and to be loyal to yourself, to the work you were meant to do." Michael's eyes met hers, searching for deception, for the angle he knew had to be there. "And what do I get out of this arrangement?" Catherine's response came without hesitation. "Triple your current salary for starters. Consultant status reporting directly to me. Full benefits maintained, of course." She paused, watching his face carefully before delivering the final offer. and access to TechCore's research partnership with Boston Children's Hospital, which has one of the leading juvenile autoimmune research programs in the country. The last item landed like a stone in still water, ripples of possibility spreading through Michael's carefully controlled expression. For Ethan, he would consider almost anything. Hope was a dangerous thing to offer a desperate father. "How do you know I can even solve this problem?" His question was a final resistance, a wall already beginning to crumble. Catherine's lips curved in a slight smile. "Because you already have. The protocol modification you proposed at CyberShield, the one they rejected, would have addressed the exact vulnerability we're facing now." Michael's eyebrows rose slightly. "You have access to CyberShield's internal security proposals. Let's just say information finds its way to those who value it properly. So, Mr. Brennan, do we have a deal? Can you fix our problem?" Michael was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks. His son's face appeared in his mind. Ethan drawing his complex diagrams. Ethan swallowing pills that cost a fortune. Ethan asking questions about science and the world with eyes full of curiosity that illness couldn't dim. "I'll need complete access to the Neuralink architecture. No restrictions, no oversight committees, no approval chains." "Done. And my work remains confidential. No one knows my background or my connection to CyberShield." "Agreed. And Ethan's medical care takes priority. If he needs me, I'm gone. No questions asked." Catherine extended her hand across the table. "We have a deal, Mr. Brennan." Michael hesitated before taking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, so different from the vulnerable woman he'd helped into his car 3 nights ago. "One more thing. Why did you really come to me? You could have hired any number of security consultants with the right credentials." Catherine's professional mask slipped just slightly, revealing something more genuine beneath. "Because you were kind when you didn't have to be. Because you saw me at my worst and chose discretion. And because I believe in second chances for both of us." Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed urgently. The hospital. Ethan's name on the screen sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. "I have to go. Family emergency." Michael was already moving toward the exit, the conversation and its implications temporarily forgotten in the face of parental fear. Catherine nodded understanding in her eyes. "Go. We'll continue this tomorrow." As Michael rushed toward the parking garage, Daniel Foster's words from Friday night echoed in his mind. This is bigger than corporate espionage now. The weight of the decision he'd just made pressed against his chest, constricting his breathing. He was stepping back into a world he'd sworn to leave behind, making deals with the very industry that had destroyed his career. For Ethan's sake, he told himself. Always for Ethan. But as he started his car, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. That Catherine Morgan's appearance in his life was not the coincidence it seemed. The night guard and the CEO, now bound together by secrets, neither fully understood. And somewhere in the digital shadows, unseen eyes watched them both, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The pediatric ward of Cedar Hills Medical Center hummed with the quiet efficiency of night shift operations. Michael sat beside Ethan's bed, watching his son's chest rise and fall with each breath. The asthma attack had been severe, triggered by a combination of stress and the changing season, but the doctors had stabilized him quickly. Ethan slept now, his face peaceful, despite the oxygen tube beneath his nose. In sleep, he looked younger than his 10 years, vulnerable in a way that twisted Michael's heart into knots he'd never learned to untie. "Mr. Brennan." Michael looked up to see Dr. Richard Collins standing in the doorway. The doctor's expression was carefully neutral, but Michael had become adept at reading the subtle cues of medical professionals. Something was wrong. "Could we speak outside?" With a final glance at Ethan, Michael followed the doctor into the hallway. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across both their faces, turning the conversation into something more ominous than it needed to be. "Ethan's condition is progressing more rapidly than we anticipated. The new treatment protocol isn't producing the results we hoped for." Dr. Collins kept his voice low, professional detachment barely concealing genuine concern. Michael's throat tightened. "What are our options?" There's an experimental treatment being developed at Boston Children's Hospital. Early results are promising for cases like Ethan's. Doctor. Collins hesitated, and Michael knew what was coming before the words formed. However, it's still in clinical trials. Insurance won't cover it, and the out-of-pocket costs are substantial. How substantial? Michael asked the question, even though he already knew the answer would be beyond his reach. Hope always came with a price tag these days. The initial treatment course would be approximately $175,000. The figure hung in the air between them, an impossible sum. A life sentence disguised as a medical bill. I understand this is difficult news. There are some patient assistance programs we can apply for, but I wanted you to have all the information. Michael nodded mechanically, thanking the doctor while his mind raced through calculations, possibilities, scenarios, none of which ended with him finding that kind of money. Except one. Catherine Morgan's offer now took on new significance. The consultant position. The connection to Boston Children's Hospital. The chance to give Ethan access to cutting-edge treatment that could actually make a difference. As he returned to Ethan's bedside, Michael made his decision. Whatever game Catherine was playing, whatever secrets lay beneath the surface of her offer, he would accept the risk. For Ethan, he would do anything, even step back into the shadows of his past. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds when Michael's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Ready to begin. Access credentials await. KM. Michael looked at his sleeping son, then typed his reply. I'm in, but on my terms. The response came immediately. Of course. Your office is ready. TechCore's research facility occupied the top 3 floors of their downtown headquarters. Unlike the sleek open design of the corporate offices below the research division, was a labyrinth of secure labs, server rooms, and specialized workspaces. The air hummed with the sound of powerful computers and cooling systems maintaining optimal operating conditions. Michael stood in the private office Catherine had assigned him, taking in the state-of-the-art equipment, the panoramic view of the city, and the absolute isolation from the rest of the team. A deliberate choice, he suspected, keeping the night guard turned consultant away from curious eyes and difficult questions. The door opened and Catherine entered, dressed in a navy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought for every inch of her position and intended to defend it ruthlessly. "How's your son?" The question came before any business discussion, genuine concern evident in her voice. "Stable. They're releasing him this afternoon." Michael was surprised by how much the simple inquiry meant, how rare it was for anyone to ask about Ethan with anything other than polite obligation. Catherine nodded. "I've arranged for a car service to take him home when he's ready. I assume you'll want to get started right away." Michael gestured to the computers already booted up and displaying login screens. "I already have." He pulled up a complex schematic on the main monitor, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced ease of someone returning to their native language after years of forced silence. "Your security team did a decent job documenting the vulnerability, but they've missed the deeper issue. The neural interface doesn't just have a vulnerability, it has a back door." Catherine's expression hardened as Michael expanded the schematic, showing her the hidden access points buried beneath layers of legitimate code. Someone deliberately built in access that bypasses the security protocols. This isn't an oversight or a design flaw. It's intentional. "Are you suggesting corporate espionage?" Catherine's voice was measured, controlled, but Michael could see the implications registering in her eyes. "I'm stating facts. These access points are sophisticated, hidden beneath layers of legitimate code. Your team didn't find them because they weren't looking for deliberate sabotage." Michael turned from the screen to face her directly. "Who would have the expertise to implement something like this?" "At TechCore, maybe 3 or 4 people. The same would be true at CyberShield. Neural interface security is a specialized field." "Could you have done it?" Catherine asked bluntly, and Michael appreciated her directness even as it stung. A humorless smile crossed his face. "Technically, yes. But since I've been checking IDs at Riverside Plaza for the past 18 months, my opportunity was somewhat limited." Catherine paced the length of the office heels, clicking against the polished concrete floor. "How long will it take you to close these back doors?" "That depends on how deep they go. I'll need to audit the entire codebase layer by layer. Could be days, could be weeks." "We don't have weeks. The board is already nervous about delays. If word gets out about deliberate sabotage, investor confidence will collapse before we even go public." Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard, diving deeper into the code. "Then we'd better hope the saboteur didn't cover their tracks too carefully." Catherine watched him work for a moment, struck by the transformation. Gone was the reserved security guard in an ill-fitting uniform, replaced by a focused professional navigating complex systems with practiced ease. This was Michael Brennan in his natural element, and it was clear he was exceptional at what he did. "I'll leave you to it. Use whatever resources you need. Report directly to me, no one else." As she turned to leave, Michael spoke without looking away from the screen. "There's something you're not telling me, Ms. Morgan. Something about why you really sought me out." Catherine paused at the door, her back to him. "Focus on finding the back doors, Mr. Brennan. One problem at a time." After she left, Michael leaned back in his chair, processing what he'd just discovered. The back doors in Neuralink's protocol were sophisticated but familiar, almost like looking at his own handwriting from years ago. The techniques, the approach, the subtle signatures in the code. He pulled out his phone and dialed Daniel Foster's number. "I need to know exactly what you know about TechCore's security breach, and I need to know now." Daniel's voice was tense when he answered. "You're working with them now, aren't you? I wondered how long it would take." "Cut the cryptic warnings, Daniel. I'm trying to close security holes that could compromise neural data for thousands of people. Those security holes go deeper than you realize." "What did Morgan tell you about Project Nexus?" Michael frowned. "Nothing. What's Project Nexus?" A long pause on the other end of the line. "Meet me tonight. Riverside Park near the boathouse. 8 p.m. Don't tell anyone, especially not Morgan." The line went dead, leaving Michael with more questions than answers. He turned back to the monitors, diving deeper into Neuralink's architecture, searching for clues hidden in the elegant complexity of the code. By late afternoon, he had mapped most of the back doors, confirming his initial suspicion. This was professional work executed by someone with intimate knowledge of both neural interfaces and TechCore's security protocols. An insider, or someone who had once been inside. An alert popped up on his phone. Ethan had been discharged from the hospital. As promised, Catherine had arranged a car service to take him home. Michael texted his neighbor, Mrs. Marie Harper, asking if she could stay with Ethan until he returned. As he prepared to leave for his meeting with Daniel, Michael copied key portions of the code to his secure tablet. Something about this situation felt increasingly dangerous. The deliberate back doors, Daniel's urgent warnings, Catherine's selective transparency. He was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, and he suspected the answers might shatter the fragile new arrangement he'd made. But for Ethan's sake, he needed to know exactly what he'd gotten himself into. The time for half measures and comfortable ignorance had passed. Riverside Park was nearly deserted at 8 p.m., the cooling October air driving most visitors indoors. Michael walked along the path toward the boathouse, senses alert for any sign of surveillance. Years in security had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct warned of danger. Daniel Foster was already waiting, a lean figure in a dark jacket, tension evident in every line of his posture. At 43, Daniel had the haunted look of a man carrying too many secrets for too long. They had worked together at CyberShield for 5 years, building security systems designed to be impenetrable. "You're taking a risk coming here. Morgan will have you watched." Daniel's greeting carried no warmth, only warning. "I can handle Catherine Morgan. What I can't handle is being kept in the dark while trying to fix potentially catastrophic security issues. What's Project Nexus, and how does it connect to the back doors in Neuralink?" Daniel glanced around before responding, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Project Nexus was a classified government initiative to develop neural interface technology for intelligence applications. Both CyberShield and TechCore were contractors competing for the main development rights. Michael's eyes narrowed. "Intelligence applications? You mean surveillance?" "Among other things. The ability to extract thoughts directly from a target's mind, to implant suggestions, to monitor neural patterns without detection. The perfect espionage tool. That's theoretical at best. Current neural interface technology isn't sophisticated enough for that kind of application. Michael's objection came from professional knowledge, not hope. It wasn't, until someone made a breakthrough about 2 years ago. Someone who understood both the hardware and encryption protocols at a level nobody else did. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and possibility. I never worked on anything like that. My research at CyberShield was focused on security, on protecting users from exactly this kind of intrusion. Michael's voice was firm, but something cold settled in his stomach. I know. That's why they forced you out. Your security protocols would have prevented the backdoor access they needed for Project Nexus. When you identified the vulnerability, you became a liability. Daniel reached into his jacket and Michael tensed instinctively. But Daniel only pulled out a small encrypted drive, holding it between them like a peace offering or a curse. And now TechCore has the same vulnerability in Neuralink. You think they're also involved with Project Nexus? I don't think I know. After you left CyberShield, the project shifted to TechCore. Catherine Morgan personally oversaw the transition. The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Catherine had sought him out not to fix the vulnerability, but to understand how he had identified it, to ensure their backdoors remained functional while appearing to address security concerns. I need proof, documentation, communications, something concrete. Daniel pressed the drive into Michael's hand. Everything I could gather is here. Access logs, project transfers, communications between TechCore and military contractors. But be careful, Michael. This information got 2 people at CyberShield killed in accidents last year. As Michael reached for the drive, a sharp crack echoed across the park, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Daniel's eyes widened in shock and pain as a dark stain spread across his chest. Michael lunged forward, catching his friend as he collapsed, the drive clattering to the ground between them. Daniel, stay with me. Michael pressed his hand against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding that pulsed between his fingers. Who's behind this? Who else knows? Daniel's breathing grew labored, his voice barely audible over the sound of Michael's racing heart. Trust no one, especially Morgan. She knows about Ethan. The mention of his son's name sent ice through Michael's veins. What about Ethan? What does she know? But Daniel's eyes had gone distant, the light fading as his body went limp in Michael's arms. Michael checked for a pulse, finding nothing but the terrible absence of life where moments ago his friend had been alive and afraid. More shots struck the concrete planter behind them, sending fragments flying. Survival instinct took over. Michael grabbed the encrypted drive and ran, staying low, using the park's landscaping as cover. Behind him he heard shouts, footsteps, the sound of pursuit closing in. He reached the street and blended into a group of evening pedestrians, his heart pounding, Daniel's blood still wet on his hands. He needed to get to Ethan to ensure his son's safety. Then he would deal with Catherine Morgan and whatever deadly game she had drawn him into. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. Catherine's number. Where are you? We have a breakthrough on the Neuralink situation. Need you back at the office immediately. Michael stared at the message, Daniel's warning echoing in his mind. Trust no one, especially Morgan. The night that had started with professional collaboration had transformed into something far more dangerous. Daniel was dead. Unknown assailants were in pursuit, and somewhere in the web of deception surrounding Project Nexus lay a threat to his son that he didn't yet understand. For the first time in years, Michael felt the cold calculation of his security architect mindset take over, assessing threats, planning countermeasures, identifying vulnerabilities. Only now the system he needed to protect wasn't code or data. It was his life and Ethan's. He typed a response to Catherine, on my way. Sometimes to uncover the truth, you had to step deeper into the darkness. And Michael Brennan was prepared to descend as far as necessary to protect what mattered most, even if it meant confronting the woman who now held both their futures in her perfectly manicured hands. The game had changed. The stakes were life and death, And the true nature of Catherine Morgan's interest in him was about to be revealed, whether she intended it or not. TechCore's research lab stood silent at 9 a.m., the morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered no comfort. Catherine waited at the main console, exhaustion visible despite her perfect appearance. Navy suit, pressed hair arranged in its usual corporate precision, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed something deeper than professional concern. Michael entered without knocking, his expression carefully neutral, despite the blood he'd scrubbed from his hands an hour ago in a gas station bathroom 3 miles from Riverside Park. Catherine looked up, relief washing over her features before professional distance reasserted itself. "There you are. I was starting to worry when you didn't answer immediately." Her concern sounded genuine, which made everything harder. Michael had spent the drive from the park to his apartment to the hospital, and finally here constructing walls between himself and the woman who might have ordered Daniel's death. Family situation took longer than expected. Ethan needed attention. The lie came easily now, smooth as the corporate doublespeak he'd once despised. Catherine nodded, accepting his explanation without pressing for details that would force him to build more lies on top of lies. "I found something unusual in the neural interface code last night. Something I thought you should see immediately." She gestured him over to the terminal where lines of code scrolled across multiple screens. Michael positioned himself to monitor both the entrance and Catherine's movements, old security instincts turning every interaction into a potential threat assessment. Catherine tapped several keys, bringing up a segment of code that Michael recognized immediately, part of the backdoor architecture he'd been mapping earlier. This section contains an embedded protocol that activates only when specific neural patterns are detected. Our team initially missed it because it's disguised as a routine error handling function, but it's actually a sophisticated monitoring system. Michael studied the code, genuine professional interest temporarily overriding suspicion. The implementation was elegant, almost artistic in its complexity, and disturbingly familiar. "Who found this?" He kept his voice neutral, watching her reflection in the monitor for any sign of deception. "I did. Before I became CEO, I headed TechCore's encryption division. I still keep my hand in when something interesting comes up." Catherine turned to face him directly, pride evident in the tilt of her chin. This revelation added another layer to the puzzle. Catherine Morgan, CEO and technical expert, possibly connected to classified intelligence projects potentially involved in Daniel's murder. The woman was becoming more dangerous and more enigmatic with every passing hour. "It's impressive work. Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing." Michael kept his tone professionally distant, referring to the code rather than any larger implications. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to read subtext in his clinical assessment. "That's what concerns me. Only a handful of people in the world have this level of expertise in neural interface security. You're one of them." The accusation hung unspoken, but clear. Michael met her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by proximity or implication. "If you're suggesting I had something to do with this, you're mistaken. I haven't worked on neural interfaces since leaving CyberShield 2 years ago. As you well know, I've been checking IDs and watching security monitors." Catherine studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read truth in the set of his jaw or the directness of his stare. "Where were you tonight, Michael? When I called, you didn't answer. You weren't at the hospital, I checked." The use of his first name caught him off guard, intimate and unexpected. Michael felt the weight of the encrypted drive in his jacket pocket, Daniel's blood still metaphorically wet on his hands. "I had personal business to attend to, concerning Ethan and his treatment options." Not technically a lie, though the omission of Daniel's death felt like betrayal of a different kind. Michael watched Catherine's reaction carefully, looking for any sign that she knew about the meeting, about the shooting, about the evidence now hidden in his apartment. "Is everything all right with your son?" Concern appeared genuine, which either meant she was innocent or exceptionally skilled at compartmentalization. Michael had worked with enough corporate operatives to know the difference was sometimes impossible to determine. "He's stable. The hospital discharged him this afternoon. Thank you for arranging the car service." Catherine nodded, then turned back to the monitors, and Michael noticed tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "So what do you make of this code? Can you modify the neural interface to eliminate these backdoors without compromising functionality? Possibly, but I'd need to understand the original architecture better. Who designed the core neural interface protocol for Neuralink? Dr. Eliza Carter. She joined us from Stanford's Neural Engineering Lab about 3 years ago. Brilliant, but somewhat unconventional in her approaches. Catherine's response came quickly, as if she'd anticipated the question. Michael filed the name away for later investigation. I'd like to speak with her. If Dr. Carter designed the original architecture, she might know who implemented the backdoors and potentially their connection to... He stopped himself before saying, Project Nexus, watching Catherine's face for any reaction to the near slip. Their connection to what? Catherine's question was sharp, her full attention now focused on him rather than the screens. To whoever's trying to sabotage your product launch. Michael recovered smoothly, falling back on the cover story they'd both tacitly agreed to maintain. Catherine hesitated, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been relief or might have been calculation. Dr. Carter is currently on sabbatical, family emergency in San Diego. She's been gone about 2 weeks and isn't expected back until after the product launch. The timing seemed suspiciously convenient, another piece in a puzzle that grew more complex with every revelation. Do you have her contact information? I could speak with her remotely. I'll see what I can arrange. Catherine's tone suggested the conversation on that topic was over a door closing with corporate finality. They worked in silence for several minutes, Michael pretending to examine code while actually analyzing Catherine's body language, her micro-expressions, the small tells that might indicate guilt or innocence. You never mentioned your background in encryption. That seems relevant to our current situation. Michael kept his observation casual, as if the information was merely interesting rather than potentially damning. Catherine's steps didn't falter as she moved toward the auxiliary terminal. There are many things we haven't mentioned to each other, Mr. Brennan, like why a top security architect would take a position as a night guard, or why you've been secretly researching TechCore's neural interface patents for the past 18 months. Michael stopped examining the code, the revelation landing like a physical blow. You've been monitoring me. Just as you've been investigating us. Let's not pretend either of us came to this arrangement with clean hands or complete transparency. Catherine turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the harsh fluorescent light. For a moment they stood in silent confrontation, the air between them charged with unspoken accusations and dangerous secrets. I think it's time we put our cards on the table. What exactly do you want from me, Catherine? Because fixing security vulnerabilities seems like only part of the agenda. Michael used her first name deliberately, stripping away the professional distance they'd maintained. If she wanted honesty, he'd give her the blunt edge of it. What I want is to protect my company and its users. Neuralink represents a technological breakthrough that will change how humans interact with machines. If it fails because of security concerns, the setback to the field would be immeasurable. Her answer was practiced, polished, the kind of statement that played well in boardrooms and investor calls. Michael wasn't buying it. Project Nexus, how does that factor into your concerns? He watched her reaction closely, looking for the flicker that would confirm Daniel's accusations or the confusion that might suggest innocence. Catherine's expression did flicker surprise, quickly masked by caution. Where did you hear that name? Does it matter? It matters a great deal, especially if you heard it from Daniel Foster. The confirmation that she knew Daniel sent a chill down Michael's spine, and the way she spoke his name past tense, as if she already knew he was dead. And if I did, Michael kept his voice level professional, giving nothing away, even as his hand moved incrementally closer to the phone in his pocket. Not that it would help if she'd brought security, but the illusion of preparedness sometimes mattered more than actual capability. Catherine glanced around the empty lab, then stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Then you're in more danger than you realize. Daniel Foster was under investigation for selling classified information to foreign entities. If he's been in contact with you, you may already be compromised. The claim contradicted everything Michael knew about Daniel, A man who had risked and ultimately lost his life to expose what he believed was a dangerous conspiracy. But it was exactly the kind of narrative intelligence agencies use to discredit whistleblowers. That's convenient. Discrediting the messenger when the message becomes problematic. Michael's response carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. Catherine's jaw tightened, something that might have been frustration or might have been fear crossing her features. I'm trying to protect you. Daniel was involved in things you don't understand, things that could put both you and Ethan at risk. The mention of his son again wielded like a weapon or a warning. Michael's hand moved fully to his phone, now no longer subtle about the defensive posture. I think I understand more than you realize, and I think it's time for me to go home and check on my son. Catherine reached out her hand, closing around his wrist with surprising strength for someone whose corporate image suggested expensive manicures and executive lunches rather than physical confrontation. Michael, please. Whatever Daniel told you, whatever you think you know, it's not the complete picture. Stay, work with me on this. I promise you'll understand everything soon. Her touch sent an unexpected current through him, not just physical awareness, but a complex resonance of danger and connection that he couldn't afford to feel. Michael extricated his wrist from her grip, maintaining composure with effort that showed in the set of his shoulders. I'll be back in the morning. We can continue this discussion then. Catherine seemed about to protest, then nodded reluctantly, professional mask sliding back into place. First thing tomorrow. And Michael, be careful tonight. There are players in this situation who won't hesitate to eliminate perceived threats. The warning could have been genuine concern or a veiled threat. In the shadowy world he'd re-entered, the line between ally and enemy had blurred beyond recognition. Michael's apartment building stood quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, a modest structure where security consisted of a temperamental front door lock and Mrs. Marie Harper's watchful eye. He took the stairs instead of the unreliable elevator, mind still processing the night's revelations. Mrs. Harper met him at the door, concern etched in the lines of her kind face. Ethan's fever is 102. He took his medication an hour ago and finally fell asleep about 20 minutes ago. Poor thing was so worried about you. Michael handed her the payment they'd agreed upon, gratitude mixing with guilt over how often he'd needed her help lately. I don't know what we'd do without you, Marie. The elderly woman waved away his words with practiced modesty. Ethan's a good boy, very smart, always teaching me interesting things. She hesitated, something uncertain in her expression. He was worried about you tonight. Said you were in danger. Fever dreams, maybe. A cold feeling settled in Michael's stomach, the kind of instinctive dread that came from knowing your child could sense things adults preferred to ignore. Probably just anxiety from the hospital stay. Kids pick up on more than we realize. After Mrs. Harper left, Michael went directly to Ethan's room. His son lay curled on his side, dark hair damp with sweat against his forehead, breathing slightly labored but steady. Michael gently placed a hand on Ethan's cheek, feeling the heat of fever. Dad. Ethan's voice came drowsy with medication, his eyes fluttering open in the dim light from the hallway. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, forcing his expression into something calm and reassuring. I'm here. How are you feeling, buddy? Better now. Did you fix the problem at work? The one with the brain computer? Michael froze, the question landing like a punch to the solar plexus. What do you mean? Ethan shifted, struggling to focus through fever and exhaustion. The lady who called. She said you were fixing a computer that connects to people's brains. She said it was very important. What, Lady Ethan? When did she call? Michael kept his voice calm while alarm bells screamed in his mind. Daniel's warning about Catherine knowing about Ethan suddenly taking on new and terrible significance. Today, when I got home from the hospital. She knew all about my condition, said you were helping her company make things that could help me get better. Michael sat perfectly still beside his son's bed, cold fury replacing initial shock. Catherine or someone connected to her had contacted Ethan directly, had used his medical condition as leverage, had crossed the one line Michael had tried desperately to keep intact. What else did she say? Just that you were very good at your job and that I should be proud of you. She sounded nice, like she really cared about helping. Ethan's eyes were already closing again, medication pulling him back towards sleep. Michael waited until his son's breathing deepened into genuine rest before moving to the kitchen. He removed a loose tile beneath the sink, retrieving a small waterproof case he'd maintained for emergencies. Inside was a secure laptop he'd kept off any network impossible to trace or hack remotely. The kind of precaution that seemed paranoid until the night someone murdered your friend and threatened your child. Michael inserted Daniel's encrypted drive, bracing himself for whatever secrets it might contain. 2 hours later, he sat motionless at the kitchen table, the evidence laid bare in clinical detail. Project Nexus was far more than corporate espionage or military intelligence gathering. The documents detailed a systematic attempt to develop technology that could directly influence neural pathways, not just reading thoughts, but potentially controlling them. Experiments on test subjects, success rates for memory alteration, behavioral modification, and in some cases permanent neurological damage. The clinical trials data showed test subjects experiencing changes they couldn't consent to because they didn't know they were part of an experiment. Schools, nursing homes, public gatherings, anywhere division could introduce neural stimulation without detection. Most disturbing were the subject files. Children, elderly, people with existing medical conditions that made their neural patterns more susceptible to manipulation. And there, buried in a subfolder labeled Priority Targets, was a file with Ethan's full name, medical history, and home address. Michael closed the files, removing the drive and returning it to its secure hiding place. The apartment felt too small, suddenly walls pressing in with the weight of what he now knew. He checked on Ethan once more, relieved to find his fever had reduced slightly. Standing in the doorway of his son's room, Michael made his decision. He would continue working with Catherine, would maintain the pretense of cooperation. But his true mission now was gathering evidence to expose Project Nexus before Neuralink could be released to an unsuspecting public. The risks were enormous, but the alternative, allowing this technology to deploy, knowing what it could do to people like Ethan, was unthinkable. His phone buzzed with a text message. Catherine's number. Progress on our project. Need update. Even at this hour, she was monitoring his activities, applying subtle pressure, maintaining the illusion of collaborative professional relationship. Michael typed a careful response. Working on solution. Will demonstrate tomorrow, 9 a.m. The reply came immediately. Looking forward to it. Stay safe. The concern in those final 2 words might have seemed genuine if Michael hadn't just spent hours reading about Catherine's involvement in experimental neural manipulation. Now they felt like a threat wrapped in solicitude, a reminder that he was being watched. Morning arrived with the harsh buzz of Michael's alarm. He'd slept barely 4 hours, but adrenaline and determination pushed him into immediate alertness. Ethan's fever had broken during the night. His condition improved enough that he insisted on going to school. I have a science presentation today about neural networks. I can't miss it. Ethan's earnestness over breakfast was both heartbreaking and terrifying, given what Michael now knew about Project Nexus's interest in his son. The coincidence of timing Ethan choosing to present on neural networks the same week Michael uncovered a conspiracy about neural manipulation felt less like chance and more like coordination. When did you start studying neural networks? Michael kept his tone casual, pouring cereal while his mind raced through implications. Ethan shrugged, pushing cereal around his bowl. A couple weeks ago, Miss Brooks suggested it for my independent project. Said it matched my interests. Michael made a mental note to investigate Rachel Brooks more thoroughly. After the revelations of last night, coincidences felt increasingly like carefully orchestrated moves in a game whose rules he didn't fully understand. Dad, are you okay? You seem worried. Ethan's perceptiveness cut through Michael's attempts at normalcy. He forced a smile, reaching across the table to ruffle his son's hair. Just thinking about work. New project with lots of pressure. Hey, how about we go to the Science Museum this weekend? They have a new exhibit on artificial intelligence. Ethan's face lit up, illness momentarily forgotten in excitement. Really? Can we see the robotics demonstration too? Absolutely, it's a date. The promise felt like a talisman against the darkness gathering around them, a commitment to a future where such simple plans were still possible. After walking Ethan to school and double-checking that he had all his medications, Michael headed to TechCore with renewed purpose. He'd prepared a modified version of the neural interface code overnight, one that appeared to maintain backdoor functionality while actually implementing subtle safeguards that would alert users to any unauthorized access attempts. It was a dangerous gambit. If Catherine or her technical team discovered his deception, the consequences would be severe. But it was the only way to buy time while he gathered more evidence about Project Nexus. The TechCore lobby hummed with morning activity employees crossing polished floors with the purposeful stride of people who believed their work mattered. Michael moved among them invisibly, just another contractor with high-level access. His face familiar enough to security that they waved him through without questions. Grant Sutherland intercepted him near the elevator bank, his imposing figure blocking Michael's path with deliberate authority. At close range, the COO's expensive suit and carefully maintained appearance couldn't disguise the calculated assessment in his eyes. "You must be the consultant Catherine brought in, Grant Sutherland, Chief Operating Officer." He extended his hand with excessive pressure, a primitive dominance display that would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. Michael shook the offered hand, noting the aggressive grip. "Michael Brennan. I'm assisting with some technical aspects of the Neuralink project." "Interesting. Catherine hasn't shared much about your background or qualifications. Rather unusual for such a critical project." Grant maintained his position, preventing Michael from reaching the elevators through sheer physical presence. Michael recognized the tactic information gathering disguised as collegial interest. "I believe Ms. Morgan values results over credentials. Speaking of which, I have a meeting with her in 5 minutes. Of course, I wouldn't want to keep you, but perhaps we could schedule some time to discuss your insights on the project. I like to stay informed about all aspects of operations." The request was framed as interest, but felt like surveillance, another layer of monitoring added to an already complex situation. Michael filed Grant Sutherland away as either division's man inside TechCore or simply a territorial executive protecting his domain. "I'd be happy to meet once I've completed my initial assessment. Ms. Morgan can coordinate our schedules." Grant nodded, stepping aside with reluctance that bordered on insubordination. "I'll look forward to it. Welcome to TechCore, Mr. Brennan." The elevator ride gave Michael time to adjust his strategy. Grant Sutherland represented another variable in an already complex equation, possibly connected to Project Nexus, possibly just corporate politics. Either way, the man's interest suggested Michael's presence had been noticed at levels beyond Catherine's immediate control. Catherine was waiting in the secure lab, reviewing data with intense concentration. She wore a charcoal suit that emphasized authority, while her hair was arranged more casually than yesterday, small inconsistencies that might mean nothing or might signal increased stress. "You're late." Her greeting carried no real censure, just observation. Unexpected meeting with Grant Sutherland in the lobby. He wanted to establish dominance and gather information about my role here. Michael moved to his workstation, watching Catherine's reaction peripherally. A hint of a smile touched her lips, quickly suppressed. "Accurate assessment. Grant doesn't appreciate variables he can't control, like you." "Is this negotiation, or are we discussing Grant's insecurities?" Michael pulled up the modified code he'd prepared, the screens filling with complex algorithms that looked authentic enough to pass initial scrutiny. Catherine moved closer, examining the work with professional interest that seemed genuine. "Both, perhaps. Grant's concerns aren't entirely unfounded. Your sudden appearance and high-level access create questions he's entitled to ask." She turned to face him directly, close enough that Michael could see the faint shadows under her eyes, suggesting insufficient sleep. "Which is why transparency between us is important, starting with Project Nexus." Michael's hands paused on the keyboard, years of security training keeping his expression neutral despite the surge of adrenaline. "I'm listening." Catherine engaged an additional security lock on the lab door, then activated what appeared to be a signal jammer precautions that suggested whatever she was about to say fell outside official channels. "We don't have much time. If Daniel contacted you before his death, and I'm assuming he did based on your questions yesterday, then you're already on Division's radar. The same people who killed him will target you next." The casual confirmation that she knew about Daniel's death hit Michael like a physical blow, even though he'd suspected as much. Catherine continued before he could respond, words coming faster now. Project Nexus began as defensive technology, a way to protect against emerging neural hacking threats. I developed encryption protocols designed to secure neural interfaces against unauthorized access. That was 3 years ago. She moved to a secure terminal, typing rapidly while she spoke. 6 months into development, the military applications became apparent. Division, the government entity funding the research, shifted focus from protection to exploitation. I objected and was gradually moved to a peripheral role. Michael watched her work, analyzing body language and micro-expressions for signs of deception. Everything about her posture suggested genuine stress, but that proved nothing in a world where trained operatives could fake sincerity. Yet you still appear in the project leadership documentation as recently as 6 months ago. Because I never formally withdrew. I needed to maintain access to monitor what they were doing with my work. When they transferred the project from CyberShield to TechCore, I engineered my promotion to CEO specifically to gain oversight. The narrative positioned her as an unwilling participant trying to mitigate damage rather than a key architect enabling it. Michael remained skeptical, Daniel's warning echoing in his mind. Trust no one, especially Morgan. That's a convenient story, one that makes you the hero rather than the villain. Catherine's composure cracked slightly, frustration breaking through professional control. In your position, I'd feel the same. But consider this, if I were fully aligned with Project Nexus, why would I bring you in? Your history of identifying and exposing these exact vulnerabilities makes you Division's worst nightmare. The logic was sound, forcing Michael to reconsider assumptions he'd built through the night. Catherine pulled up a secure file, gesturing for him to examine it. This is the current iteration of Project Nexus, developed without my input or approval. The neural influence capabilities go far beyond what I believed possible. They're not just monitoring thoughts, they're testing methods to implant them. Michael examined the technical specifications with growing horror. The backdoors he'd identified in Neuralink were more sophisticated than he'd initially recognized, designed not just for data extraction, but for bidirectional neural communication. If this technology deploys with Neuralink, it creates infrastructure for unprecedented privacy violations and potentially for mass manipulation. Catherine's voice carried conviction that was either genuine or exceptionally well performed. That's why I sought you out, Michael. Not because you drove me home one night, but because your work at CyberShield demonstrated that you understood these risks before anyone else. The scenario she presented was plausible, perhaps even likely. But Daniel's evidence and the file on Ethan suggested layers she wasn't revealing. Michael needed to verify before committing to either alliance or opposition. If what you're saying is true, you're taking an enormous risk by confiding in me. Why now? Why not when we first met? Catherine's expression hardened. Corporate mask fully dissolved. Because I needed to be certain of your position. Daniel's death confirms that Division is eliminating anyone who threatens to expose Project Nexus. By telling you the truth, I'm potentially signing my own death warrant. Or setting me up, creating a paper trail that frames me as the conspirator if things go wrong. Michael's counter came automatically, trained skepticism overriding the pull toward believing her. Frustration flashed across Catherine's face, raw and unguarded. What would it take to convince you, Michael? What proof would you accept? Michael considered the question seriously, weighing risk against potential gain. Access to Dr. Eliza Carter, the original architect of Neuralink's neural interface. If she corroborates your story, I might be inclined to believe you. Eliza is in protective custody. When she discovered how her work was being modified, she threatened to go public. Division arranged her sabbatical to keep her contained. Catherine's response came without hesitation, suggesting either truth or a well-rehearsed cover story. You said she was in San Diego. Family emergency. That's the official story. The reality is that she's being held at a Division facility outside Portland, Oregon, officially for psychiatric evaluation following a stress-related breakdown. Michael processed this information, re-evaluating the puzzle with each new piece. If Catherine was truly working against Project Nexus, her position was as precarious as his own. If she was lying, she was extraordinarily skilled at it. If you're truly working against Project Nexus, why not go public? Take the evidence to the press or regulatory authorities. Because division has infiltrated both, and because going public without a solution would only delay the project, not end it. We need to do more than expose Nexus. We need to render the entire approach technologically unfeasible. Catherine stepped closer, intensity radiating from her in waves that felt electric and dangerous. That's why I need you, Michael. Together we can develop security protocols that make neural manipulation impossible, regardless of what division wants. We can build safeguards directly into the architecture that can't be removed without destroying functionality. The technical challenge she described was exactly the work Michael had been passionate about at CyberShield, creating unbreakable protection for neural data. The opportunity to resume that research to potentially prevent unprecedented privacy violations was powerfully tempting, but trust remained the insurmountable barrier. I need time to verify your claims, and I need assurance that Ethan remains completely outside of this situation. Catherine nodded solemnly, something that might have been shame crossing her features. I understand, but we don't have much time. Neuralink is scheduled for release in 3 weeks, and now that Daniel has been eliminated, Division will be watching for any other potential leaks. What about Grant Sutherland? Where does he fit in this scenario? The question came partly from genuine curiosity and partly to test Catherine's willingness to implicate others in TechCore's leadership. A shadow crossed Catherine's face, something darker than the professional tension she'd maintained until now. Grant is Division's primary contact at TechCore. He oversees Project Nexus implementation and reports directly to their leadership. He's dangerous, Michael. If he suspects you know anything about the project, he won't hesitate to take action. The warning aligned with Michael's initial impression of Sutherland, the calculating assessment in his eyes suggesting capabilities beyond corporate maneuvering. Still, Catherine's rapid willingness to identify him as Division's operative could be deflection, shifting suspicion away from herself. Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine's phone vibrating on the desk. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. Grant has called an emergency executive meeting about Neuralink security status. He specifically requested your attendance. Michael felt the noose tightening around his neck. That seems premature. I've barely begun my assessment. It's not about your assessment, it's about establishing control. Grant wants to evaluate you personally, determine whether you're a threat to Project Nexus. Catherine's voice carried grim certainty, and Michael understood they'd both just run out of time for careful maneuvering. Whatever Grant Sutherland had planned for this meeting, it would force Michael to reveal more about what he knew than was strategically wise. The TechCore boardroom projected power through every design element, massive polished table, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Michael entered alongside Catherine, acutely aware of calculating gazes tracking their arrival. Grant Sutherland sat at the head of the table, a position that should have belonged to Catherine as CEO. The power play was obvious, establishing hierarchy before discussion even began. Around him sat 5 other executives, each projecting the same blend of corporate confidence and thinly veiled ambition. Catherine, Mr. Brennan, thank you for joining us. Grant gestured to 2 empty seats deliberately separated. Michael noted the tactical positioning divide and isolate. We thought it important to get a status update on the Neuralink security situation given our proximity to launch. Catherine took her seat with practiced grace, betraying none of the tension Michael had witnessed in the lab. Of course, Grant. Though, as I mentioned, Mr. Brennan has only just begun his assessment. Even preliminary insights would be valuable. Grant turned his attention to Michael, and the room's focus shifted like a spotlight finding its target. Perhaps Mr. Brennan could share his initial findings. Michael recognized the trap immediately. Without knowing exactly what Grant knew about Project Nexus, any statement could reveal his own knowledge or lack thereof. The safest approach was technical competence without specific revelations. My preliminary review indicates several areas of concern in the neural interface, potential access vulnerabilities that could compromise user data. I'm currently mapping these vulnerabilities to determine their scope and potential solutions. Professional vague, revealing nothing beyond what any competent security consultant might identify in initial assessment. Interesting. And what specific access points have you identified as problematic? Grant's question was precision-targeted, designed to determine exactly what Michael had discovered about the back doors. Michael chose his response carefully, walking the line between credibility and revelation. The primary concerns are in the neural pattern recognition protocols. Specifically, the error-handling functions contain nested callbacks that could potentially be exploited by sophisticated attackers. Grant's expression revealed nothing, but Michael noticed a slight relaxation in his posture, the confidence of a predator who believes his prey remains unaware of the real danger. And your background in neural interface security comes from... The question hung deliberately, a clear invitation for Michael to reveal his connection to CyberShield and potentially expose himself as a threat to Project Nexus. Various projects over the years. Neural interface security is a specialized field with a relatively small community of experts. Michael kept his response vague, offering nothing that could be used against him while maintaining professional credibility. Grant smiled thinly, the expression carrying no warmth. Indeed, such a small community that most specialists know each other. Yet none of our team seems familiar with your work. Catherine intervened smoothly before the confrontation could escalate further. Mr. Brennan's credentials were thoroughly vetted before his engagement. Grant. His expertise is precisely what we need to address the security concerns before launch. Of course, I'm merely expressing the board's interest in ensuring we have the right expertise for such a critical product. Grant turned to the other executives, building coalition through shared concern. Neuralink represents significant investment and opportunity for TechCore. Given the security concerns Catherine has raised, I believe we should consider delaying the launch to ensure all vulnerabilities are addressed. The suggestion sent a ripple of concern through the room. One of the executives spoke up immediately, sharp-faced woman Michael didn't recognize. A delay would significantly impact our IPO timeline. Grant. Investors are expecting Neuralink to hit the market before our public offering. Better a slight delay than a security scandal that tanks our stock on day one. I'm simply suggesting we give Mr. Brennan adequate time to complete his assessment and implement solutions. Michael recognized the strategy with growing unease. Grant was positioning himself as the voice of caution while simultaneously buying time for Project Nexus to complete its implementation within Neuralink. A delay would serve Division's interests, not undermine them. That won't be necessary. Michael's voice cut through the discussion, drawing all eyes back to him. I believe I can address the critical vulnerabilities within the original timeline. With proper resources and cooperation from the development team, we can maintain the launch schedule while ensuring user security. Grant's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. That seems optimistic, Mr. Brennan. Perhaps dangerously so. I don't believe in setting expectations I can't meet. If I encounter obstacles that necessitate a delay, I'll be the first to say so. Catherine interjected before Grant could respond, her voice carrying the authority that came with her title, even if Grant had claimed her physical position at the table. Michael's confidence is based on his preliminary assessment. I suggest we allow him to continue his work before making decisions about timeline adjustments. Tension in the room was palpable as Grant weighed his options, political calculation visible in the set of his jaw. Finally, he nodded with calculated magnanimity. Very well. Mr. Brennan will continue his security assessment with full access to the development team. We'll reconvene in 3 days to evaluate progress. As the meeting dispersed, Grant approached Michael with practiced smoothness, corporate predator acknowledging worthy opponent. I hope you don't feel I was challenging your expertise, Mr. Brennan. Security is simply paramount for any neural interface technology. The potential for harm if vulnerabilities are exploited is significant. The implied threat hung in the air between them, dressed in corporate pleasantries but unmistakable in intent. Michael matched his tone, playing the game because the alternative was immediate exposure. I understand completely. Rest assured I'll be thorough in identifying and addressing any potential exploits into the system. Grant's smile never reached his eyes. "I'm counting on it, for everyone's sake." As Michael and Catherine left the boardroom, the weight of confrontation settled over them like a physical presence. Catherine spoke quietly as they entered the elevator. Her words meant only for him. "He knows. He's testing to see how much you've discovered about Project Nexus. And now he's accelerating his timeline. We need to move faster than anticipated." Michael's mind was already racing ahead, calculating next moves in a game that had just become exponentially more dangerous. The elevator doors closed, sealing them in momentary privacy. "What exactly are you proposing?" Catherine's expression was resolute corporate mask, completely abandoned in favor of something raw and determined. "We need to access the complete Project Nexus documentation, not just the portions I've been permitted to see, but the full implementation specifications. With that, we can develop countermeasures that will render the neural influence capabilities inoperative while appearing to function normally. That documentation would be heavily restricted. Attempting to access it would immediately alert Division. Not if we use the right credentials. Dr. Carter's login still has the necessary clearance. Division hasn't deactivated it to avoid raising suspicions about her absence." Michael considered the implications, understanding immediately what she was proposing. Using her credentials would be traceable. Whoever does it would be immediately identified as a security threat. "Exactly. Which is why I need to be the one who does it. As CEO, I can potentially justify my access if discovered. You need to remain above suspicion to continue work on the countermeasures." The elevator reached the research floor, but neither moved to exit. They stood in suspended animation, the moment of decision hanging between them like a blade. "Why would you take that risk? If caught accessing classified Nexus files, Division won't hesitate to eliminate you." Michael searched her face for any sign of the deception Daniel had warned him about, finding only determination and something that looked like fear, poorly hidden. "Because some things are worth risking everything for. The technology we're developing could fundamentally change human autonomy. If I help create this monster, even unwittingly, I have a responsibility to stop it." For the first time since meeting Catherine Morgan, Michael felt the possibility that she might be exactly what she claimed, not a willing architect of Project Nexus, but a reluctant participant trying to undo a dangerous creation. "Even if I believe you, we'd need more than documentation to stop this. We'd need proof of Division's intentions, evidence of their unauthorized neural influence testing, something concrete enough to force regulatory intervention. That evidence exists in the same secured servers that contain the complete Nexus specifications. Daniel found fragments, which is why they killed him, but together with your security expertise and my access, we could extract the full documentation." The elevator doors opened again, prompting from the automated system. Still, they remained caught in the gravity of decision that would determine not just their own fates, but potentially thousands of future Neuralink users. When would we make this attempt? Michael's question carried implicit acceptance, a commitment to the dangerous path she was proposing. Tonight, after regular hours when most security monitoring is automated rather than human. We'll need to move quickly before Grant realizes what we're planning. As they finally exited the elevator, Michael's phone vibrated with an incoming call. The school's number flashed on screen, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his system that had nothing to do with corporate conspiracy and everything to do with primal parental fear. "Mr. Brennan, this is Principal Morrison from Westside Elementary." The principal's voice carried tension that made Michael's blood run cold. "There's been an incident involving Ethan. He collapsed during his presentation and experienced some kind of seizure. The paramedics are taking him to Cedar Hills Medical Center now." The world seemed to tilt beneath Michael's feet. Daniel's warning about Division targeting Ethan suddenly transforming from abstract threat to terrible reality. "I'm on my way." Words came automatically while his mind reeled with implications. Catherine followed without question, concern evident in her expression as they rushed toward the parking garage. "What happened?" "Ethan. Seizure at school. They're taking him to the hospital." Michael's words came clipped, professional detachment already crumbling under the weight of fear for his son. Catherine didn't hesitate. "I'll drive. My car is in the executive garage. We can be there in 15 minutes. Michael wanted to refuse to maintain separation between his son and the dangerous game he'd been drawn into. But urgency overrode caution, and Catherine's Tesla could navigate traffic faster than his aging Honda. As they rushed toward Cedar Hills Medical Center, neither noticed Grant Sutherland watching from the executive floor above his phone pressed to his ear. Subject is responding as anticipated, proceeding to Phase 2. In the shadowy war of Project Nexus, a new battlefield had just opened, and Ethan Brennan had become its first casualty. Cedar Hills Medical Center's emergency department carried the familiar rhythm of crisis managed with professional calm. Michael pushed through the automatic doors with Catherine close behind, heading straight for the triage desk where a nurse looked up from her computer. Ethan Brennan, 10 years old, brought in by ambulance about 20 minutes ago. The nurse's fingers moved across her keyboard. Pediatric Assessment Bay 3, you're his father. Michael was already moving before she finished speaking. Bay 3 held a cluster of medical personnel around a small figure on a gurney. Ethan's pale face turned toward him, relief flooding features too young to carry this much fear. Dad. Michael reached his son's side, taking the hand that stretched toward him. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Patel, according to her badge, continued her examination while addressing Michael directly. Mr. Brennan, Ethan experienced what appears to be a complex partial seizure during class. He's stable now, but we need tests to determine the cause. Michael forced himself to focus past the primal terror of seeing his child hooked to monitors. He has juvenile autoimmune disorder. Under Dr. Collins' care. Could this be related? Dr. Patel's expression suggested professional uncertainty. Possibly, though, seizures aren't typical for JAD. Has he experienced anything like this before? Never. Ethan's voice came small but clear. I was presenting on neural networks. The screen started flashing weird patterns. My head hurt really bad and then nothing. I woke up in the ambulance. The screen. Flashing patterns. Neural networks. Michael's training translated the details into terrible understanding. This wasn't medical crisis, but targeted attack. Division demonstrating their capability to induce seizures through neural stimulation, using his son as both test subject and warning. Dr. Patel ordered tests, while Dr. Collins arrived, his familiar presence offering small comfort. As medical staff prepared Ethan for transport, the boy's gaze fixed on Catherine with unsettling recognition. You're the brain-computer lady, the one who called yesterday. Catherine stepped forward, concern crossing her features. Ethan, I never called you. When did this happen? After I got home from the hospital. She sounded just like you. Knew about my condition, about Dad helping with the neural interface. Michael's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He opened the message while rage built like pressure behind his eyes. Neural stimulation can be precisely targeted. Today was demonstration only. Cooperation ensures no escalation. Division. He showed Catherine. Her face paled as she read Division's casual admission of attacking a child. This is criminal assault. They're admitting it in writing. Because they believe they're untouchable. Michael's voice carried the cold calculation that came before decisive action. Dr. Collins emerged from examining Ethan, pulling Michael aside. Tests will take 3 hours. Some unusual markers in his blood work, possibly medication reaction. I'll stay with him personally until you return. The emphasis on return suggested Collins understood more than a pediatrician should about situations requiring fathers to leave sick children. Michael made the choice that tore at him even as logic demanded it. I have to handle something that affects Ethan's long-term safety. Keep him secure. Hospital staff only. Collins nodded with the gravity of someone who'd seen enough to recognize when questions would only complicate necessary actions. Michael leaned over Ethan's bed. I'll be back before you know it, buddy. Everything's going to be fine. Ethan's warning followed him out. Be careful of the patterns, Dad. They make your brain do things you don't want. Catherine's Tesla cut through afternoon traffic toward Tech Core. Michael reviewed footage on his tablet, a woman matching Division operative Alexandra Harris entering Westside Elementary 30 minutes before Ethan's seizure. They used my son as a test subject. The words came barely above a whisper. Catherine's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Division identifies pressure points and exploits them without hesitation. That's how they operate. She pulled into TechCore's service entrance using executive credentials to bypass standard security. We enter through research loading dock. Fewer cameras. Inside, Catherine led him through maintenance corridors with the confidence of someone who'd planned this route carefully. They reached a secure door marked Research Archives, and Catherine's biometric scan granted access to a climate-controlled space filled with physical documentation. At Dr. Carter's workstation near a restricted access door, Catherine's fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating security layers with expertise that went far beyond typical executive knowledge. "I headed encryption before becoming CEO. That's how I recognized your work's significance." She used Carter's credentials with a hardware authenticator accessing the classified Project Nexus directory. Files appeared months of unauthorized neural influence testing on unsuspecting subjects at schools, nursing homes, public gatherings. My God, they've been experimenting on people who never consented, don't even know they were test subjects. Michael found the file labeled Targeted Demonstration, Subject EB10. Complete documentation of the attack on Ethan with neural response measurements and effectiveness ratings. They documented assaulting my son like a science experiment. Catherine copied files to an encrypted drive while the lights suddenly dimmed, security system cycling. Someone was accessing main controls. "We need 3 more minutes." "We may not have 3 minutes. They're isolating this section." The lights cut entirely, replaced by red emergency glow. Full containment protocol. Catherine disconnected the drive, securing it in her jacket. Emergency exit through document storage, not on main security grid. As they moved through darkened archives, the main door opened. Security had arrived. Michael positioned himself behind storage units. "I'll create a diversion. You get that evidence out." Catherine hesitated, hand on his arm. "Daniel's apartment, 9 p.m. If you're not there by 9:30, I release everything to media." She disappeared toward the secondary exit. Michael triggered a fire alarm, drawing security response away from Catherine's route. Using the confusion, he navigated ceiling crawl spaces toward the maintenance stairwell, reaching it just ahead of pursuing guards. He scaled the perimeter fence and vanished into the city, discarding his compromised phone after texting Dr. Collins to stay with Ethan. Behind him, TechCore pulsed with Division's futile search. Daniel Foster's apartment at 3C stood quiet when Michael arrived at 8:54 p.m. He picked the lock, entering the space that reflected his dead friend's meticulous nature. A hollowed-out copy of Cryptonomicon on the bookshelf yielded a small encrypted drive, Daniel's backup evidence. Catherine arrived at 9, cut on her cheek and suit disheveled but intact. She'd escaped through service tunnels beneath the research building that Division hadn't fully mapped. "Did you get it?" She produced the encrypted drive. "Everything we downloaded, test protocols, implementation details, authorization chains, including documentation of the attack on Ethan." Michael showed her Daniel's drive. "Backup documentation. Between these, we have the complete picture." They worked in focused silence, setting up Daniel's automated distribution protocols, cascading releases triggered by their failure to check in at specified intervals. Evidence would reach oversight committees, media contacts, and regulatory authorities, even if Division eliminated them. Catherine activated counter-protocol devices, generating patterns designed to disrupt neural influence technology. How do we know this actually works? We don't. That's the problem with neural influence by design. Subjects don't know they're being manipulated. We take precautions and move forward. At 10:47 p.m., Michael's burner phone buzzed. Dr. Collins' tests complete. "Ethan sleeping. Some concerning markers but stable. Call when you can." Michael made the calculation. 3 hours to infiltrate Division's backup facility, implement counter protocols, and document Grant's confession. Then back to Ethan before he woke. "We move now." The backup facility's exterior suggested abandonment, peeling paint, minimal lighting, rusted fence. But Michael's trained eye identified armed guards on precise 15-minute patrols and fixed cameras with calculated coverage. Security's heavier than the schematics indicated. Division upgraded after detecting our activities. Catherine studied the patterns. "Can we still get in?" Michael identified a 3-second gap in camera rotation at the loading dock. Most security professionals would consider that acceptable risk, but most aren't defending against someone who designs these systems. They moved during the gap reaching the loading dock precisely as cameras rotated away. Inside gleaming corridors contrasted sharply with the derelict exterior cutting-edge data center disguised as industrial ruin. Using maintenance pathways with fewer cameras, they reached the server-level checkpoint. 2 guards monitored access, professional and alert. Michael modified environmental controls, creating a gradual temperature increase in a distant server zone. 5 minutes later, alarms sounded. A technician appeared explaining the urgent situation to guards who verified his credentials. In that moment of divided attention, Michael and Catherine slipped through an access panel into the secured area. Catherine used Dr. Carter's credentials at the restricted server room door. The system requested secondary verification. She provided pre-recorded network responses from Daniel's equipment. The door released with a pneumatic hiss. Inside 6 specialized server racks held TechCore's most sensitive projects. Catherine connected to the Neuralink development backup while Michael spread Ethan's drawing beside the laptop. Your son perceived the fundamental architecture. These modifications don't just block influence pathways, they redirect them into detection protocols that alert users to manipulation attempts. Working together, they implemented Ethan's counter protocols into the core code. The system resisted these changes, fundamentally altered Division's proprietary functionality. Catherine bypassed alerts using Carter's highest credentials, initiating an update sequence that would push changes to the production environment. Once this propagates, Division's neural influence capability becomes inoperative. Michael activated Daniel's distribution protocols, sending complete Project Nexus documentation to designated recipients in a cascading sequence designed to survive suppression attempts. Evidence distribution initiated. Even if they stop some outlets, others will continue. An alarm blared, full security breach notification. Red lights pulsed through the facility. They detected us. We need the emergency exit. They ran through corridors as security personnel mobilized. Michael led Catherine to the east perimeter emergency exit, crashing through the door that triggered additional alarms, but granted them access outside. 2 guards converged from the north. Michael deployed a specialized tool, creating a temporary gap in the security fence. Catherine went through first, Michael following as flashlight beams cut through darkness behind them. They reached the extraction point, an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel 3 blocks away. Safe for the moment, Catherine's phone buzzed. Dr. Collins' Division leadership containment underway. Palmer in custody. Hospital security reinforced. Return immediately. Michael stared at the message. Collins is part of Oversight Commission monitoring Nexus. That's why he was so cooperative. Then it's working. The evidence is reaching the right people. They emerged from the tunnel into pre-dawn streets, heading back to Cedar Hills. But Michael's phone buzzed again, this time a call from a blocked number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Brennan, this is Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Cyber Crimes Division. We've received extensive documentation about Project Nexus. We need your testimony. Michael's hand tightened on the phone. Grant Sutherland, is he in custody? Not yet, but we have a warrant and tactical teams moving into position. Dr. Collins suggested you might help us get a recorded confession. Sutherland requested a meeting with you at Peterson's apartment in 1 hour. We think he's trying to verify what you know before deciding whether to eliminate you or negotiate. Michael looked at Catherine, who'd heard enough to understand. She nodded once they'd come too far to stop now. I'll be there, but I want guarantees for my son's protection. Already arranged. Ethan Brennan is now under federal protective custody at Cedar Hills. Dr. Collins has been read into the operation. Daniel's apartment became a staging ground. FBI technicians installed hidden cameras and audio equipment while Michael and Catherine waited. Agent Chen briefed them efficiently. Grant Sutherland is Division's primary contact at TechCore. We need him to confirm his role and Division's activities on record. Let him talk. The more he reveals, the stronger our case against his superiors. At 2:17 a.m. Grant arrived with 2 operatives. Michael recognized the subtle signs these men were under. Neural influence, their movements slightly too coordinated to be natural voluntary action. Grant settled into a chair with false casualness. "Mr. Brennan, Miss Morgan, I'm glad you decided to be reasonable." "We're not here to be reasonable. We're here to negotiate." Michael's voice carried none of the fear Grant expected. "We have everything. Every Nexus file, every test subject, every authorization, secured with automated release triggers." Grant's smile was cold. "The FBI is already mobilizing. Your evidence is redundant. Palmer knows operational details. We have strategic architecture. The names at the top, the government officials who authorized human experimentation, the private sector partners who funded it." Catherine leaned forward. "We want Nexus shut down permanently, every backdoor removed, every neural influence capability destroyed, and guarantee of safety for us and for Ethan." Grant's laugh carried genuine amusement. "You think you've won. You haven't. Nexus isn't one project, it's infrastructure. You shut down TechCore's version 3, others continue. You expose division, another agency takes over." He stood pacing with the confidence of someone who believed himself beyond consequences. "This is about national security, preventing terrorism. If we can read thoughts of enemies, we prevent attacks. If we can modify behavior of criminals, we eliminate crime. And if you can modify anyone's behavior, you eliminate freedom." Michael's words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Grant's expression hardened. "Freedom is overrated. Safety matters more. Here's my offer: you destroy all evidence, stop interfering. In exchange, I don't have your son's neural pathways permanently damaged. Today was demonstration. Next time, Ethan becomes a vegetable." The threat against a child delivered with clinical precision was exactly what they needed. Michael triggered the device in his pocket, high-frequency pulse that disrupted neural influence on Grant's operatives. They stumbled, confused. "What? Where am I?" Grant's shock was visible. "That's not possible. The control protocols—" "We implemented Ethan's countermeasures 6 hours ago. Every neural link device, every neural interface. Your influence technology is dead." Catherine's voice carried quiet triumph. One of the freed operatives turned his weapon toward Grant. "You used us, made us do things against our will." Lights blazed on. FBI agents poured in from multiple entry points. Agent Chen approached Grant with handcuffs. "Grant Sutherland, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, unauthorized human experimentation, violation of neural privacy statutes, and threatening a minor. You have the right to remain silent." Grant's face drained of color as he realized the entire conversation had been recorded, his confession captured by federal agents. "You can't stop Nexus. It's bigger than me. Division will continue." Agent Chen's smile was sharp. "Division is already shut down. Oversight Commission seized all assets an hour ago. Your government contacts are being arrested as we speak. This is over." The scale of the coordinated operation became clear, not just TechCore, but simultaneous raids nationwide. Peterson's evidence combined with Michael and Catherine's documentation, creating a complete picture that couldn't be suppressed or ignored. Dawn broke over Cedar Hills Medical Center as Michael and Catherine were escorted by FBI agents to Ethan's room. The boy was awake eating breakfast, and his face lit up when he saw his father. "Dad, you're okay?" Michael pulled his son into a tight embrace, everything else falling away in that moment. Catherine hung back, watching the reunion with something raw in her expression. Ethan noticed her. "You're the real brain-computer lady, not the fake one who called." "Yes, I'm Victoria. I work with your dad, and I'm very sorry about what happened to you." Ethan studied her with his unsettling perceptiveness. "Thank you for helping Dad. He's really smart, but sometimes he needs help too." "Doctor." Collins entered with Agent Chen. "The experimental treatment at Boston Children's funding has been secured. Call it compensation for what Ethan endured. There's also a fund being established for all division's test subjects." Michael's throat tightened. The $175,000 treatment that had seemed impossible was now available, and more Ethan's future secured his condition potentially curable. 3 months later, Michael stood in Boston Children's Hospital, watching Ethan through a window. The treatment was working beyond anyone's projections. autoimmune markers decreasing, energy levels rising. His son drew with other children, not medical diagrams anymore, just dragons and spaceships and normal kid things. Catherine joined him at the window, taking his hand naturally. TechCore's board voted Grant out. They want me to stay as CEO, but I told them I need time to figure out what I actually want. What do you want? She looked at him, something vulnerable in her expression that reminded him of that first night in the rain. Something real, something that matters. Not billion-dollar valuations or corner offices, maybe something small but important. Michael smiled. I got a job offer. MIT wants me back. Teaching position neural security ethics. Training the next generation to build things right from the start. MIT's in Cambridge, right about 2 hours from here. The careful casualness of her question made him laugh. I've been thinking about Boston too. For TechCore's new research ethics division, we'd need someone to head it. Someone who understands both the technology and its consequences. Is this negotiation or a job offer? Maybe both. Also might be asking if you'd want dinner sometime. Somewhere normal where the biggest threat is overcooked steak. Catherine's smile reached her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. I believe I already accepted that invitation. They kissed there in the hospital corridor, choosing each other with the certainty of people who'd survived the worst together. Ethan noticed through the window, grinning and giving an enthusiastic thumbs up before returning to his drawing. 6 months later, a small house in Cambridge's suburbs held the morning routine of an assembled family. Michael made breakfast while Ethan worked on homework, regular 5th-grade math. Nothing about neural networks or system architecture. Catherine arrived with coffee and newspapers. Headlines proclaimed, division officials sentenced the Neural Privacy Act passed unanimously, TechCore leading ethical AI development. But these victories felt distant compared to the immediate reality of Ethan eating cereal without medication, planning weekend activities that didn't involve hospitals. Mrs. Marie Harper had moved with them, arriving now with fresh pastries and neighborhood gossip. Morning Brennan family. The normalcy was hard-won and precious. Michael taught at MIT. Catherine ran her ethics division remotely. Ethan attended regular school and played regular sports. The weekend plan was the Science Museum, not Cedar Hills Medical Center. That evening, Michael and Catherine watched Ethan experiment with a telescope in the backyard, their astronomy phase temporarily replacing his previous obsessions. Catherine leaned against Michael, content in a way her corporate achievements had never provided. Think we changed the world? Michael considered the question seriously. We changed our world. Sometimes that's enough. Ethan called out, excited about Jupiter's visibility. They joined him at the telescope, 3 people looking at stars together, a small family built from broken pieces, not perfect, but absolutely real. Michael's final thought carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. 2 years ago, I was checking IDs at a shopping mall, watching my son slowly lose a battle with an immune system that saw him as the enemy. I'd sacrificed everything, career, identity, future, for his survival. One rainy night changed everything. Not because I met a CEO or exposed a conspiracy, but because I learned that sacrifice isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning, and sometimes the person you become in darkness is stronger than the person you were in light. Catherine squeezed his hand. Ethan adjusted the telescope, and the future stretched before them. Unwritten but hopeful, earned through courage rather than granted by fortune. Some lines once crossed create bonds that cannot break. Division had crossed that line when they targeted Ethan Brennan, and in trying to control one family, they'd awakened forces that dismantled their entire operation. The security architect and the CEO had won not through violence, but through competence, determination, and the kind of love that refuses to surrender. And in winning, they'd found something neither had expected: a future worth fighting for, built not on corporate success or professional vindication, but on the simple truth that some things matter more than power. Family, safety, the right to think your own thoughts without manipulation or control. These were the things worth any sacrifice. And Michael Brennan, standing in his backyard watching stars with his son and the woman who'd helped him save both their futures, finally understood what victory actually looked like. It looked like a normal Tuesday evening in Cambridge, where the biggest decision was what to have for dinner and whether Ethan could stay up an extra hour to finish his astronomy observations. It looked like freedom.